Okay, it's me again. Okay, so like me, you could buy your way into the Unsung podcast. These guys provide us with so much wonderful listening pleasure and some other not so wonderful songs and albums as well, but that's by the by. Anyway, what you should do is consider donating to these three wonderful influences on the local and international music scene. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Never felt so important before.
Mark, how do you go about donating?
Go to patreon.com/unsungpod. See some very nice things you can get for your money, and some ridiculous things if you've got ridiculous amounts of money, which I think it might take off soon actually, because it's just totally farcical. But yeah, you can start from as little as $2 a month and you'll get access to bonus episodes and early access to every single episode that we do, and then it just scales up from there. Eventually you can get t-shirts and masks of our faces and, you know, just full bodysuits and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, so we do kind of generic t-shirts, but we also do custom shirts where you get to pick an album cover and we'll somehow fanny ourselves into the scenario, and that's turned out pretty well so far for the people that have got one. They seem pretty happy. And also, you can, as Anna said, buy your way onto the show. Effectively, you can, for a certain level of donation, you can basically pick the subject and we'll do one. We're actually going to release one of those very shortly, and that's kind of cool because you can choose anything you want. We've done a couple in the past, and yeah, mixed results, or certainly mixed quality.
Can I interject here? I just also want to make sure that the listeners know that I did not buy my way into this particular episode. Bad Religion is certainly not my choice.
Yeah, I would actually... Am I too late to buy myself out of this episode?
I really don't appreciate it. It's like, you know what, Anna, you were invited here, and this is like turning up and complaining about the dinner, right? It's like, I don't like this. I didn't want this. Me and Mark spent the best part of 20 odd years slaving over a hot stereo, right? Getting into this band, and you'll bloody like it, okay?
Okay.
And there'll be no dessert unless you finish.
Okay.
Let's just do the episode now, right? You've got me in a mood.
Wait, one more thing. Sorry, Chris, I know you're in a mood, but I need to just do a couple of... So if you do $5 a month, we'll do a personal anthem for you, and we will ask you to send us your favourite albums, and a lot of people haven't done that, so we've just went fucking totally cavalier. So I'm just going to shout out 3 of them just now. Mr. Corey Robinson, who is... Like he's got one of those t-shirts like Chris has mentioned, and it's a fucking belter as well. We decided his personal anthem is La Belle Age by Pat Benatar. Chris,
no,
yourself.
La Belle Age by Pat Benatar. What a tune. What a tune. Honestly, it's absolutely huge. I'll stick a sample in here and I will enjoy doing it.
Best friend of the pod, Craig Carrick, who literally did buy his way onto the fucking show. Waiting for a Star to Fall by Boy Meets Girl, which has got one of the best saxophone bits ever, I think.
No doubt, but seriously, he'll be really, really pleased with it.
And my friend Jason, who is Greek and I can't pronounce his surname, and the last time I tried it, he just laughed at me.
Simpliakos?
I think so. I said that last time and he just laughed at me. So, Hyperspace by Nada Surf, and he actually messaged me afterwards and said, "Who picked that song? Because it's a belter." So well done, Chris.
Yes, that is a great song. Yeah. Alright, you're welcome, Jason. I'm glad I got it right.
Yeah, so let's go on with this fucking shit show. Should we go back to the old intro?
Aye, let's do that, and let's fucking turn about, and we'll just throw Anna in at the deep end.
Okay. This is totally unplanned, and the look on her face is brilliant. So let's roll with it. Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung podcast. I am your host, Mark Fraser, and I'm joined by Glasgow's two best comedy Bond villains.
Oh yeah, the right of my screen is Odd Job.
Oh, that's a low blow. I knew that was coming. I've also got a femme fatale as well. That's how patronising is that, Anna?
Okay.
Yeah, Miss Funny Penny.
And to my left is gold member, Mr. Chris Cusick.
Oh. So I got introduced twice and Dave got none. You know, we never actually noticed when we stopped doing that. I've not traced it back, but that used to be the format, and it just at some point fell by the wayside.
If you know the answer to that question, please get in touch.
If you know more about our show than we do, what the fuck are you doing with your life?
Well, so I guess if you do know this show though, then one thing that comes up in Unsung Podcast Bingo is how early into the podcast will Chris mention Bad Religion?
Or Nazis.
Or Nazis.
Yeah, and this is like a cell phone, because Anna used to always rip me after the fact when I'd go mention Bad Religion or Pennywise during an episode relating to punk, because it was like my go-to kind of pattern. So it was like, well, fuck you, Anna, this week we're going to do Bad Religion. You're getting invited on.
Yeah, very pleased to be here, and I will not be doing any woo 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 sirens every time you say Bad Religion for a change.
Yeah, we don't have a Bad Religion alarm, we've got a Prince alarm.
Yeah, we should have a Bad Religion alarm. It should definitely be a woe or a harmony or something. Folks, if you haven't guessed, we're doing Bad Religion this week. Probably the next 2 weeks, if I'm brutally honest. Sorry, guys.
This is definitely good. This is a two-parter. Let's just be honest, right?
Yeah,
now,
so let's
okay?
just out the gate with that. Yeah, we decided to do a head-to-head. So initially, when this was announced, I said I was going to do Suffer, which I've since changed my mind on, and I've decided to do the Process of Belief.
I could go supersonic, the problem's chronic. Tell me, does life exist beyond it? When I need to sate, I just accelerate into oblivion. Into oblivion.
Which is a great album from the early 2000s, and Chris has picked...
Well, yeah, when this was announced, I decided not to say what I was going to do because I didn't know. So I've decided to do The Grey Race from 1996.
The grey ray shrivels, trapped inside the world it creates is black and white. The grey ray shrivels, trapped inside the world it creates is black and white. The perfect...
Although I was definitely torn, and I did actually really consider the Process of Belief as well, so I'm not against your choice, but mine's better. So,
And then we have two impartial referees, is that correct? Anna, what's your Bad Religion background?
My background is that they're a band that I've listened to since I was a teenager through friends enjoying them or them being on different compilations. I think they were on like Punkorama and stuff
Punkorama,
like
all of them, I think.
Yeah.
They were on all. Were they not the first song on the first ever Punkorama?
Hey, do what you want, but don't do it around me. Idleness, anticipation, breed apathy. I sit on my ass all goddamn day. A misanthropic employed with nothing to say.
Well,
You
yeah,
tell
you know,
me.
Brett does own the label that put the
Yeah.
put the compilations
Yeah.
out. So.
I'm pretty sure they were the opening track of the first Punkorama CD, and then they were on all of them almost still.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my experience of them. Not a band that I've ever really got into because, to be honest, the vocals don't really do it for me. And interestingly enough, though, listening back to them because of the recommendations from you guys of what we were going to be covering this week, I can appreciate a lot more of the songs now, I think, than I had previously done. And even the vocals on some songs are okay with me, because I'm normally more into the kind of shouty punk stuff. and there's a lot of singing in Bad Religion songs and melodies, and I'm more into the kind of raw, visceral sound in comparison to that.
Just on the subject of the singing, I just had a note that I'm very similar to you. I've never really got into Bad Religion, and I think the vocals are a big part of that. And to me, I've said that they just sound like a sort of man in his 30s who'll tell you for quite a while why his Android phone is better than your iPhone. He's got a large selection of waterproof trousers, and he's definitely going to try get you into rock climbing.
That is a wonderful.
There's 18 albums of that, and I just
biology.
My God,
genuinely have a friend called Dave who has a large collection of waterproof trousers, really likes rock climbing, almost certainly has like one of those old Android phones, and likes Bad Religion.
Well, there you go.
Target demographic.
Yeah, he's a star.
You really hit the nail on the head with that one.
I mean, the reason, Bad Religion is one of the ones that, again, a bit like PG Harvey, right from the very, very, very start, it was sort of in the back of our minds, certainly Mark and I. Anna, I think one of the reasons I really wanted you to be part of this, other than just to break up the pure sausage fest that is this podcast, was
and this band,
was because I enjoy the fact that you are like one of my punkiest friends in your own distinct way. Like, you've got your own quite nuanced tastes in the genre that don't always kind of match mine, but I dig that, and I like the fact that we've kind of not ever really quite seen eye to eye in Bad Religion, but I've also never had you sort of like sat in a chair, not allowed to move for 2 hours, like, hey, let me actually try and articulate what it is about this, because I suspect that a lot of the things you don't really get excited about in the band are actually quite similar to the things that I don't get excited about by the band. And I was quite encouraged that even your early texts to us when you'd been spending time listening to them for this, I was like, I do think we're kind of on a similar trajectory here. I'm just a lot further down that road, so I was really kind of keen to explore that. And I know Dave's a big fan of like a big tune, I know that, and whilst Bad Religion stylistically can be a little bit narrow, they're really unabashedly into melody, and I don't listen to a lot of like punk, certainly not American punk, but the ones that I do tend to be the ones that really go for the jugular with big songs. And as you get later in Bad Religion's career, that becomes more and more of a feature. I think they're definitely a card-carrying punk band early on. They were kind of godfathers of that SoCal scene, and I think from their early albums, we'll go through the albums obviously, we'll go through the members as well, because that's quite informative, but from How Could Hell Be Any Worse through to maybe Recipe for Hate, they were really, I think, a punk band, albeit a punk band that were trying other things. But from Stranger Than Fiction through the Grey Race and a little bit onwards, they became more of like a big rock band mixed with a punk band. They'd always kind of thrown in the odd big anthem, and I think they really started to straddle that from that point onwards and embrace the sort of arena nature. And they're not an arena punk band, they were never anywhere like as big selling as the likes of Green Day or even Offspring, but they had arena anthems, so they would play slightly bigger venues. Bad Religion are not gothy in the slightest in their image, but seeing their songwriting, it's quite... They're one of the closer bands melodically to the Misfits that I can think of, like in terms of going for minor notes, minor keys, minor harmonies. I know the Misfits were a much darker, gothier themes, but I just mean in terms of the actual like melodic structure of the songs, it's quite downbeat. Even some of their most like buoyant songs are actually quite negative in tone, and I always loved that minor aspect to their songwriting. And I also think like aspects like we'll obviously talk about Greg Graffin, the frontman, and probably I think the only member that's been in the band all the way through. His intelligence, he's very... I think Dave talks about that 30-something man talking about his Android phone. That's really Greg Graffin. He's a PhD in zoology. His lyrics are ridiculously ambitious, and I've got a schooling with Dr. Graffin special round for later in the podcast. But his intellect, his high-level vocabulary especially set them apart. I think Brett Gurewitz, or Mr. Brett's credibility as a sort of punk pioneer, DIY guy, the founder of Epitaph Records, plus even just the fact, he had those years of like drug addiction and that. He's just like a punk rocker, and the two of them married really well to create this band that had a mixture of kind of cerebral and emotional credibility. Not a lot of other bands really could find that balance, and I think because of that balance, because of the amount of credibility they had a license to experiment, and they ended up not being quite as boxed in as some of their contemporaries, which is why especially as you get on in their catalogue, you see them branching out in sort of slightly more ambitious directions. I just think they're a really, really interesting band in regards to their enduring quality, their credibility. I mean, I know there's some albums that absolutely suck balls, but over the course of like a 40-year career, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, and cards on the table for me, I was seriously thinking about this week. If someone said to me, pick your 5 favourite bands, if you could only have 5 bands and you could take their discographies away with you, would you pick Bad Religion? I was like, I think I would, yeah. And I genuinely might even pick Bad Religion at the expense of Fugazi. That's how much I like them.
Are you fucking mental?
What?
I'm not.
I'm not even a Fugazi fan, right? And not that I'm not saying that I don't think they're a good band. That's not it at all. They're just not a band that I listen to. I think they are a very good band, and I actually cannot even understand how you would put Bad Religion in their place. So I'm interested to hear what you've got to say today that's going to counter that idea, because it's just shocking to me.
Don't get me wrong, I mean, I am like an absolute card carrying Fugazi.
Yeah, but that's what makes it weirder, is because surely you're aware of like the range and the dynamics of Fugazi. We'll just
dynamicism.
Yeah.
Dynamism, I think is the word.
And then you compare that to Bad Religion.
This is the thing that, sorry, I don't want to go too far down that, right? I mean, my top 5's a Hollywood thing that clearly everybody listening to this podcast right now desperately wants to know. But Bad Religion I've been listening to now for 25 years, and see, just as the grey race wound to a close when I was making my notes, I was just fucking beaming, and I was like, that album is still just amazing. It's so good. It's fun. It's buoyant. I can sing along with it. It's just great, and it's great in a way that isn't it's not hard work at all. And there's virtually no albums I've had for that length of time. And we're talking about Nirvana, which would be probably my number 1. And I don't listen to them anywhere near as much as I would listen to Bad Religion now. They haven't aged anything like as well, and that's really taken me aback for doing this episode. I'm like, I can put them on and have an excellent time, and talking to friends that I got into the band at the same time as, they're the same. They're like, man, it's fucking great going back and listening to this band. They're so good.
I think there's 2 things I would probably add to that. First of all, we've spoken about it a few times, usually when it comes to punk records, but some of the other things that we've covered as well is like, simple things done well is a fucking really hard thing. And I'm not saying Bad Religion are a simple band. Like, a lot of the stuff they create is actually deceptively difficult, especially from a punk point of view. But that kind of nuance to the songwriting, and then also the complete timelessness of it. Like, they were ahead of the curve at the start, and the curve is still catching up with them in a lot of ways. Whether that's riff wise, or they were probably the first skate punk band, one of the first skate punk bands without a shadow of doubt, and one of the premier hardcore punk bands of the mid 80s. That sound is still not aged really that much at all.
I think it's interesting how they predate and post-date most of their rivals by some way. And I'm not saying by any means they've had a consistently brilliant career. They've had a lot of very, very poor records, increasingly so in recent times, but yeah, at the same time saying that, they can still throw in an absolute ripper. Their last album has 1 or 2 brilliant, like genuinely brilliant songs in it. The album prior to that is really good. We'll go through the records. There's something about this band that, as Mark says, I think they really stuck to the task, whilst also suitably pushing out the margins of it into slightly bigger anthems and stuff along the way, and it's just dated so well. Anyway, right, sorry Anna, I know I can see other people can't see your faces rapidly contorting into the looks of like disgust. This is why I'm trying to look away from the computer screen to finish my sentences, right?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I want to say something before we start. It's actually quite remarkable that me and Chris have managed to agree in a punk band that we both love. Like, that's a high watermark for this podcast in and of itself.
Well, the thing is, Mark, and as Anna will testify, pretty much any other time there's been a punk band or moments of a punk band I've liked, it's because I've been like, that's a wee bit like Bad Religion.
Yeah.
So I found different accounts of this right for the very, very start.
Yep.
79 or 80 did they form?
Who knows? Who really knows?
I was just looking at it on the Wikipedia and it said 79.
Yeah, but other places said 80. Yeah. Anyway, 79 or 80, we'll say thereabouts. And as we mentioned, like Greg Graffin, the original vocalist, Jay Bentley was the original bass player, albeit he's the longest other serving member of the band. That he took a couple of years out during an absolutely farcical period that they had, which we'll talk about. And who else? We got Brett Gurewitz. And there's a number of other people that have been in and out the band over the years that we'll just run through them just now, because they do lend a lot of the credibility and contribute to the mythology of the band in a lot of ways, because they've got so much pedigree spread amongst them. I'm not even going to go into some of them because there's too many, but Greg Graffin, first and foremost, the singer, really distinctive voice. He's also done bits of synth, unfortunately, as well as piano, acoustic guitar. He has a PhD in zoology from Cornell University that we mentioned. Greg Graffin wrote as a thesis that you can get hold of, which is called Evolution and Religion, Questioning the Beliefs of the World's Eminent Evolutionists.
Mm-hmm. He's got a couple of books out as well about the same topic.
Yeah, he does have a couple of books. One of them is Belief in God Good, Bad or Irrelevant, which I think was like a kind of long-standing dialogue he had with a guy called Preston Jones. Mm-hmm. Preston Jones is a lecturer at John Brown University in Arkansas, which is a Christian university, a religious university, but he's also a big fan of the band, and the two of them had got into this like protracted dialogue and decided to collaborate on a book and just sort of go up against each other.
That sounds like a chat in a kitchen in a party that I would definitely avoid.
It's just like a chat in a kitchen in a party that I wasn't invited to, but that I lied my way into.
Well, yeah.
I mean, Greg Graffin's stance on his beliefs is quite interesting. We'll touch on that a bit later. What did he settle on? He doesn't go for atheist. He goes for a naturalist, which he says has... I kind of get where he was coming from. He said that naturalism implied more of a methodology, that he believes in the study of natural phenomena in science, and everything is verifiable and open to reappraisal at any given time when new information becomes available, whereas he felt that atheist was a bit too much of a full stop. It didn't really suggest anything about the methodology, about how you got to your beliefs. But he's certainly not religious, and I mean, he's quite famously so. He's spoken at various things as a result of that. He has a Rushdie Award, a Salman Rushdie Award from Harvard Humanist Society. He also has, did you know he has an extinct bird named after him?
Yeah, saw that, yeah.
The Quillania graffini. One of the best facts I found out about Greg Graffin is that he actually wrote a pilot for a TV show called The Punk Professor. Yeah. Which is clearly like a comical version of who wrote Atomized? What's his name? Houellebecq, Michel Houellebecq, the French writer, who's like a lecturer, and all his books just happen to feature an aging lecturer who's lusted after by 18-year-old students. I kind of imagine the Punk Professor being something similar. And on that note, one of the best facts I remember finding out about Greg Graffin back when it broke in Kerrang, that indispensable news source, was that he was caught wanking online back when in the early days of wanking online.
Nice.
Brilliant. Was that on like Face Party or something like that?
Was it AIM? Is that
AIM?
Yeah, AOL Instant Messenger.
Yeah. So a girl bought the thesis as a present for her boyfriend, hoping he would sign it, and it had an email address on it that was or I don't know, somehow they got connected in AIM, and and this just basically culminated in him spunking on camera.
That's amazing.
But I think he wasn't married at the time. He was a divorcee, which is either more admirable or more tragic. I can't tell. And the boyfriend of the girl was actually just off camera the whole time.
Fuck yeah, that's amazing.
And he was apparently watching it. He's a huge Bad Religion fan. He's like, oh my god, Greg Graffin is jacking off over my girlfriend.
That's amazing. I mean, see if there was a musician that you really admired, would you sit off camera while they wanked over your partner?
I can't say that I would be into that. Personally.
Mark would have let Prince do anything. Literally
So
anything.
small.
Mark could have driven home to his parental house with his fucking laptop and slid it under the door while his mom was in the shower for Prince, right? That's how much he's into that. But that's never going to happen now because Prince is dead.
He's so dead.
Mark, do you want to talk about Mr. Brett?
I don't really know if I can follow that. So yeah, Mr. Brett Guerwitz, he formed Bad Religion with Greg Graffin in high school. Kind of Epitaph Records was kind of the big deal, and the first release in Epitaph Records was the first Bad Religion EP, which is just called Bad Religion, 1981.
Stop wasting my time with your factory busted dime. Factory busted dime.
And since then he's gone on to be, well, shall we say, one of the forefathers of punk rock. Can we say that? Can we say that?
He's certainly one of the most powerful forces in it because he's, I mean, the success of Epitaph Records is also the success of a number of other bands that might never have broken through if it wasn't for him. And he's been quite diverse in what he's released as well.
Yeah, I mean, Epitaph's whole vibe was always just to release punk rock records, but as time has went on, he's not been too fussed about changing with the times and what DIY and what kind of punk is, I guess, to him. Epitaph Records are probably the biggest indie record label in the world, if you can call them that. I guess they're technically a half an indie label now because half is owned by Sony, I think. But he's...
And obviously we've mentioned them before because they had an offshoot called Anti, which was responsible for a lot of good releases as well, such as Tom Waits, when Tom Waits became a bit more of an eccentric. So
Epitaph is kind of apart from Bad Religion, Epitaph is one of his things, and he's also quite a well-known producer as well. Apart from producing all the Bad Religion records that he's been on, with the exception of some of the later ones, for whatever reason that is, he's also worked with a lot of seminal punk rock bands like NoFX, like No Use for a Name, like Rancid, Pennywise. You know, all the ones that were on Epitaph. I guess he's worked with in some capacity at some point as a producer.
Did you hear that, Anna? He said Pennywise and you didn't give him shit.
It's within the right context, though, isn't it?
And he's definitely got a distinctive style as a producer, but we'll come to that as we go through the records.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't start out brilliantly. I mean, he did produce some of the kind of middle period Bad Religion stuff. He produced their Generator album, which sounds like shit.
Totally.
We'll talk about that as well. Also a guy that has had high profile problems with drugs over the years. So he actually, I think they seem to culminate at roughly the same time. So when the Grey Race came out in '96, he left the band after the Stranger Than Fiction tour, and then in 1997 he was admitted to went in a hospital for addiction treatment, and I guess maybe everything was all falling down around him at that point. Also, interestingly, he is a deist, which is completely at odds with fucking. He called himself a provisional deist. Is how he described it. A provisional deist is very non-committal, isn't it? It's like, I'm a deist, I sort of believe in something, and provisional is like, well, I'm about ready to sort of believe in something. It's like, well, I'm about ready to invent a new colour, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. So I'm not really sure how seriously to take that, but maybe he's just getting old. Maybe he's just getting fear of death.
Maybe.
I will say I haven't gone into depth in this, but I was under the impression he left just a few weeks before the tour for Stranger Than Fiction, not after it, and that he was replaced for the tour, but he did perform in the album. So just in case somebody jumps down our throats, one ends is right.
Yeah. But I mean, they seem to have all come down, kind of crashing down around him in roughly the same couple of years. I don't know if those things are related. Like, one of the reasons he doesn't tour with Bad Religion now, apparently, not just because it's a full-time job being the owner and CEO of FDAF Records, but also because apparently he just fights with them if he's on the road with them. Take from that what you will. At this point, the only time you can ever see Bad Religion with 3 guitarists is when they play in LA, and maybe
it's kind of overkill, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, having 3 guitarists on stage when you're a band like Bad Religion is completely pointless. But I guess it's a cool thing to see, right? So he rejoined the band 2002 with The Process of Belief, which is really interesting. We'll probably touch upon this in a little bit, but you've picked the first album when he wasn't on it, and I picked the first album when he came back.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird. And since then, they've kind of... It's weird to think about how they've been since then, and we'll cover it in more detail, but they've kind of not got any bigger or smaller. They've kind of maintained since The Process of Belief, which is pretty cool.
So the other kind of founder member that we talked about was Jay Bentley.
Yeah.
And Jay Bentley, bassist, he left from like 83 to 85, which is basically the era that is into the unknown, which is when the band... I don't want to say inexplicably, because there were other bands doing it, but the other bands that did it, like Wire, did it to much greater effect, decided to go in a sort of proggy, synthy, post-punk direction, and it really didn't pay off for them. It's weirdly though, it wasn't the worst reviewed album at the time, but definitely it's been sort of blotted out of the band's history sonically since then. But Bentley left at that point. He also has done like shifts with TSOL, Circle Jerks, Wasted Youth, and Jay Bentley's the guy from Bad Religion that took part in Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, which was actually a pretty fucking great covers project.
Do you want to know what Jay said about Into the Unknown, or shall I leave that until we talk about that record, because it's quite funny?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, so we'll come back to that. We've got Brian Baker. Brian Baker, in case you've recognised the name, is also one of the founders of Minor Threat. Which is about as credible a punk pass as you can get. That's like a AAA punk pass.
Dag Nasty and Sam Hain as well. Like we can't talk about those bands. Like, this guy's fucking legendary. Absolutely.
So it's a hell of a replacement for Brett Gurewitz in '94 when he left for that for going into the Grey Race. And obviously I've picked that album and I really like what Baker brought to the party. You've got Greg Hitson, who I've seen Bad Religion and I fucking love this guy. You got was it the Hitson Leap is now a phrase for like a style of jump when you're playing punk rock guitar, because he was so hyperactive on stage. Greg Hitson was actually credited on How Could Hell Be Any Worse, but his official debut wasn't until Suffer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but he played a solo in the track Part 3 on How Could Hell Be Any Worse. Who else do we have? Bobby Shire. So Bobby Shire is one of the most notable drummers, not the original drummer, we'll talk about them in a second, but Bobby Shire joined for Generator in 90. He joined in 91, Generator was 92. He played on some of the biggest albums: Recipe for Hate, Stranger Than Fiction, Grey Race. He played in Tested. He was in No Substance. He was in New America, and then he basically developed, it was partly an injury, but also the result of like RSI and a rotator cuff injury that meant that he apparently can't lift his arm above his shoulder.
Mad.
It'd be his right arm. I think it was the hi-hat arm. It was just some like repetitive damage that he did to that joint, and he just can't lift his arm now. So he retired just prior to the album that Mark's picked, and he was replaced by a guy called Brooks Wackerman. And Brooks Wackerman was also the drummer for Suicidal Tendencies, which is no small feat. He played in the Vandals as well. Brooks Wackerman is a fucking terrific drummer, like a really terrific drummer. The guys in Bad Religion at the time when he auditioned said he was the best drummer they'd ever seen playing live, full stop. He went on to do stuff with Tenacious D. Dave, he played in Korn for a bit, did percussion for Korn.
Big thumbs up for me. Sound of Stripes.
I can't remember what album it was, but he played like percussion on one of the Korn albums. And he played for Avril Lavigne, presumably after Taylor Hawkins joined some other band. I'm not sure, I can't remember the name. And now Brooks Wackerman's in Avenged Sevenfold. Yep. A favourite of all of us, I'm sure.
He replaced Mike Portnoy though, so you know.
Well, that's true. And as I mentioned, like, Bobby Scher wasn't the original drummer. That was a guy called Jay Ziskru, or Ziskrut, and he stormed out halfway through How Could Hell Be Any Worse sessions because of some misunderstanding regarding promotional pictures, and apparently he wasn't happy with the photos or the discussion. There's a bit of a tantrum, toys are thrown at the pram. He walked out the studio, left them kind of in the lurch for the sessions, for the second half of those sessions, and was replaced by Pete Finestone, who was, I think they're like drum roadie at the time, and he finished the sessions and then went on to play with them for quite a while until 91. Well, actually, not strictly true. It was a different drummer came in for Into the Unknown very briefly, but he was not invited back. But yeah, so I mean, there's more musicians involved in that. There's more synths in the kind of modern history of the band, but I don't really feel like going into it. I mean, it's not like we're going to get Greg on the show now anyway after illustrating his online browsing habits in detail.
Well, it's probably worth mentioning the current guitar player who replaced Greg Hetson when he left. I think it was due to addiction issues as well. As a guy who used to play for the Cult and Sucker Punch called Mike Dimkich, and he seems like
Greg Hetson was addicted to jumping.
He seems like a lovely man.
Jumping.
So.
Addicted to jumping or leaping, depending on
jumping and leaping same time. So he came in. I apologise. Hetson left because of a divorce. So there you go.
Too much jumping.
Personal issues, and he was replaced by a guy called Mike Dimkich, who's currently the guitar player, and he seems like a lovely chap. He
spare a thought for Greg Hetson's ex-missus, right? And he's on the bed jumping about, practicing his moves for tour, right? And she's like, Greg, just come to bed. And he's like, I've got to do a few more.
I think I need to see some live footage of this guy to be fully in on the joke.
Sorry, Mark.
Anyway, shall we crack on then?
That's what she said. Greg Hetson's wife, I mean.
Poor guy, he's getting absolutely hammered by you.
Fucking hell, we're going to have to pivot here, guys, to save it. How Could Hell Be Any Worse? Mark, you like that album?
I like it because it's snotty as fuck. It's a proper punk record. You know, coming out at the very end of the 70s, well, it started in 82, but it feels like it's got a 70s vibe. It's a cool album, I think. Recorded for, there's some different accounts here on how much this record cost. Wikipedia says $3,000, but the Bad Religion page says it was $1,000 loan from Brett's father, and then the rest was money left over from the sales of the EP. And it was produced by Jim Mankey from Concrete Blonde, who I'm not familiar with. And yeah, it's widely seen as being one of the most important punk rock records of all time.
Really interesting reading a Zach De La Rocha interview about it, talking about what a huge influence on him that album was, saying it was like darker than most punk music at the time. There was something really oppressive and sort of intimidating about it.
Yeah.
I think the back cover of it has like Dante's Divine Comedy. I think the oppressive kind of red and black picture of Los Angeles in the cover, the title. Tracks like Fuck Armageddon, This Is Hell. There was something just quite intense about it. Yeah, it's a really formative record. It sold 10,000 copies, which I guess just highlights the difference in eras. I never musically really warmed to the record. It's not the side of punk rock that I really give a shit about. Yet listening to it, it's very, very apparent how important it was. When we did the pop punk episode, you could really hear the repercussions of this album manifesting in other bands that followed them.
Yeah, and you know, it's definitely raw. It's rough around the edges. Greg's voice still hasn't fully matured yet, so it does sound a bit bratty in places. But I like the vibe of it, and you know, it is what it is. And you can, right away, from the very get go, you can totally see the kind of divergent styles of like Graffin and Gerowitz, right, and their songwriting. It becomes apparent immediately, you know. But it works, you know, and that's the whole sort of crux of the band has always been that sort of fulcrum of their songwriting, which I think is the strongest point. And I guess we'll talk about that a bit later on when we get to the Grey Race. But
did you newbies get a listen to this?
There was a couple of songs that I heard. It's alright.
And it's a bit more legit punk rock. Did it not appeal to you?
Had a wee listen. It's alright.
Yeah. It had a bit more edge, which I enjoyed.
In all honesty, it's not like I hear Bad Religion songs and think, oh, that's a terrible song, I don't like it. I think I can now quite objectively look at the stuff and think back to my previous opinions on them and think, okay, maybe just because it wasn't the style of punk that I liked, then I didn't like it. But now I can listen to the stuff and I can appreciate it. And yeah, I appreciated that. I think it was a good feat.
Yeah, as I say, it's just not something that really jumped out to me. And I think the band themselves were pretty unsure of where they wanted to go. I mean, I mentioned bands like Wire, who also did a sharp sort of right turn in their career and went into this kind of weird electronic kind of post-punk phase. So the album following this is the notorious Into the Unknown. Which is very, very self-aware, even just in its title. Came out in 1983, and it's just a total what the fuck moment. It's got a guy called Paul Dodona on bass. It's got a guy called Davey Goldman on drums. Different band. They described it as... They sort of described it affectionately. It's a bit dorky. They were really enjoying listening to prog and decided for whatever reason that they thought it was a good idea to try and deviate towards that. I read some comments saying that what this album highlighted was that this was a punk band that, far from being very po-faced and saying that excess was sort of gauche, you know, indulgent and bourgeois, they actually thought that excess was pretty badass, and this album sort of showcases that. They're not a band that are necessarily taking themselves so seriously that they think you shouldn't enjoy or indulge in things that are a bit OTT, and I think their vocals throughout their career have sort of have hinted at that anyway.
I can drop some knowledge in that if you want as well, by the way. I've got some cracking quotes about it.
Sure, absolutely. Just in a nutshell, it did come out in Epitaph. It was self-produced. It doesn't sound great. It's got tracks like Time and Disregard, which is way over 7 minutes and is the longest song of their career.
We did it together in our borderless state. Survival our instinct, nature our fate.
It did actually get some pretty favourable contemporary reviews. Some people quite liked the direction they were going in, but not their fans. Their fans really didn't respond to it well. Yeah, Mark, I mean, hit us with some contemporary feedback.
Jay's recollection of this record is while they were still recording the first song, I was in the band for half the first song and then I walked out in the middle of it. I wasn't really interested in pursuing a progressive rock career, which is quite funny in itself. Brett in 1991 said we realised it was a blunder, I think, halfway through doing it, which is weird. They burned boxes of this.
But yeah, they kept going. They kept going.
Yeah, like.
But they spent, apparently their first album, it took 3 attempts to record the first album. But yet with this one, halfway through, they realised it was a mistake, but they just fucking did it anyway. What's that?
They done it in a week as well.
I mean, surely they got to a point where they thought, right, we've came this far now, we might as well just continue with it and try it.
It was like 3 years.
Well, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here.
Oh,
We've never done it before, Anna.
so
that's true.
They pressed 10,000 copies of this record and it only sold like 2,000, not 2.
Two copies.
Not 2, 2,000, sorry.
It's a wee shame for them.
And it was like they hated it so much, right, that Brett Gerwitz actually fucking burnt at least 3 boxes of it.
like an effigy.
And he said in 2013 that it's the only album that he's embarrassed about writing. You can actually buy it on eBay for over $100, which is quite funny. And
You know, the crazy thing is they've done other albums since that you should be embarrassed about writing.
absolutely, yeah. They still play the Dichotomy live. They actually were playing it in 2019 on
Wow.
the start of the Age on Reason tour. So they still played a couple of songs, but they still get, it's only part of Dichotomy because they usually play it. They play like Recipe for Hate like right into it, so it's actually works quite well. It's like more of like an intro, I suppose. And the best bit of trivia I could find about it was that Greg Graffin still has the master tapes in his basement, so if he wanted to remaster it, he could.
Oh man, maybe it would actually turn out alright if they remixed it. Maybe not. I don't know. And I think actually talking about like the self-awareness of the title, Into the Unknown, the sense of just defeat, the title of the EP that followed it, just like
Back to the known.
It's like, so you just imagine the band slumped over, dragging their guitar along the ground, knowing a case, just like, right guys, back to the known.
The end is almost here. The sky, the air, so nice and clear. The sound of earth decay and the ringing in the air is the scream debris of yesterday.
And they just packed it up, and that was it. It's like 1985, right? We're done. We're going on 3 years off. The band's effectively over, but it wasn't over.
Yeah, but one interesting thing about that record before we move on to the next one is that they didn't think that even though the first record had sold 10,000 copies, they still didn't think the band was ever going to be a serious thing. So they were like, let's just fuck around and do another record. That's what they thought when they went to make it. And obviously it didn't quite pan out that way, but I kind of like the intention of like, oh fuck it, we're just young guys, we're just a band, let's just do whatever the fuck we want, and obviously completely backfired spectacularly.
To be fair, they didn't know they were going to be a band for 40 years, so yeah. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. In 1987, supposedly Gurewitz had kind of cleaned his act up. He'd got off the skag, which I believe was the issue, and they decided to reform. And they created a really pretty excellent punk rock album. It was 25 minutes long, released an epitaph called Suffer.
Can't see their lives are just like yours, and untold and undiscovered. You're leading to the gift of hope renewed, eternity for you. The masses of humanity have always had to suffer.
Which, Mark, you were going to pick?
Yeah, I was going to pick it because it is a superb record. It's timeless, totally timeless.
Yeah, in the words of Fat Mike, it's the record that changed everything.
Yeah.
And definitely one of the most important punk records, certainly one of the most important, like it's got to be top 3 American punk records in terms of influence. It really, one thing I love about this as well, it's got a really iconic cover. It's a little bit childish, a little bit puerile, the little kid with his skateboard standing on fire, but it's kind of great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's got a naivety to it that's really, really just perfectly judged.
I always remember this one getting mentioned in like best of punk lists when I was reading Kerrang, and so it's probably a good thing you didn't choose it because it's probably the one that isn't unsung out of their whole discography. That
and probably Stranger Than Fiction are probably the two. And Stranger Than Fiction is because it sold the most.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to draw a distinction there though, because we'll come back to Stranger Than Fiction. I think the thing with this album is, for me, no offence, I think this album's a little bit oversung. I think it's hugely influential, but I think in terms of like actual listening, they've done so much better since it. Now I realise it's all about context. I realise they were young at the time and it was like groundbreaking at the time, but I mean it was 1988. It wasn't like the Stone Ages, you know. It wasn't like the Back of Beyond. And I mean, there's tracks on it I love. I mean, not a lot of them. I think You Are the Government is by far the best track on the record.
Hey, sit down and listen and they'll tell you when you're wrong. Eradicate but vindicate as progress creeps along. Puritan work ethic maintains its subconscious edge as old glory maintains your conscious
and it's one that I've always added to mixtapes, but this album doesn't it doesn't do a massive amount for me other than that. When you said it was your choice, Mark, I was like, probably going to piss you off.
Well, it's wall-to-wall bangers for me. Just complete, 15 tracks, no fucking around. There's no song over 2.5 minutes really on it, apart from one, which is 2:44, which is still under 3 minutes. It's just such a good record. I think they're really good at doing, Bad Religion are great actually at doing 3 songs in the bounce that are great. You're the Government, 1,000 Fools.
Absolutely.
So good.
The Bad Religion triumvirate is a big thing. They do that in some albums where they just hit a run of 3 tracks and it's just...
Yeah.
We're definitely going to mention that again.
To me, this record sounds like the exact halfway point between Dead Kennedys and NoFX. And I kind of feel like the band sound like that as well, but this album specifically.
I think that's a fair assessment at this point, definitely. Yeah.
I really enjoy early Dead Kennedys stuff, so I can see that there. I think that's a good comparison between them, because what I would say is actually as time goes on, the Bad Religion sound to me becomes almost kind of similar to that Social Distortion type of sound.
Yeah, correct.
And, I would kind of group those bands together, but if you're going back to the earlier stuff, then that makes sense, and that's more my kind of sound.
I mean,
an interesting bit of trivia about this as well is that it features 3 members of L7, the Los Angeles L7, because we spoke about another one recently. It features Danita Sparks and Susie Gardner, both doing guitar on Best For You, and it's got Jennifer Finch doing extra vox on part 2, I think it is.
Superficial progress, they call it liberation.
yeah, because Gurewitz said he was producing L7 at the time, so that would have made sense to get them involved.
Yeah, they also were one of the first names signed up for Rock for Choice that L7 set up, or helped set up, the pro-choice fundraiser musical event, and then they regularly made TV and video appearances wearing the Rock for Choice t-shirt, in fact quite controversially at points. So a bit of trivia I can share is Greg and Brett both wrote 2 songs a week for a month, and then that's how they got all the songs for Suffer. So it was like a massive amount of creativity to try and get to what would become this records. And one thing that I really like about it is, a lot of people probably don't know this, but all the lyrics are inspired by Dostoevsky, and the whole concept comes from sublimation, and catharsis can be achieved through suffering. So clearly at this point, Greg's
deep.
Well, after Bad Religion broke up after Into the Unknown, and Brett fucked off with his heroin addiction, Greg actually kept the band going, just playing shows and doing that EP Into the Unknown when he was in college, studying. So clearly he had his head really into academia at that point, so not at all surprised that kind of made it into this album.
So they followed Suffer with No Control.
It's their best album.
89.
So we think we're in control. Questions that besiege us in life are testament of our helplessness. There's no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. When we all disintegrate, we'll all have been again.
It's on a lot of lists as their best album. It's some of their fucking coolest artwork, I'll give them that. It's another one with a really iconic cover, that big neon spray painted high impact logo that they've got.
The artwork on that stands out because it doesn't have their branding on it. It looks more like something. Looks more like a hip hop record or something.
Yeah, well, it doesn't give away the genre of the music. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. It's quite subtle in that respect. It's only 26 minutes long. It's faster. It's a bit more hardcore.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's more songs in this that I think are really essential tunes. I think like Big Bang.
I got this feeling and I don't know what it is. This room is overcrowded and I need air to breathe. Yeah, big bang, big crunch. There's no free lunch. Kneel down.
You, Automatic Man, I Want to Conquer the World. Like their songwriting was definitely improving. They were still doing a lot of the same moves, but they were just a little bit more astute and turning those into like really catchy, punchy, memorable things with more hooks.
But what you can see on this record is that with Sanity, the song Sanity, like I think Jay said it during an interview for Stranger Than Fictions, like Brett has actually always wanted to be a pop songwriter. He's just never been able to figure out how to do it properly with Bad Religion.
Insanity is a full-time job in a world
It does get there with some songs much later on and in the record after this, but you can see it. You can see what he's thinking with a song like Sanity on this record, which is fine. It's a right song, but it's a lot more kind of slower, moving towards that.
Yep. We kind of spoke about that like just at the start. Bad Religion from this point on, so the next album, Against the Grain, 1990, they start to throw in at least one song per record that is like a sort of slowed down arena rock style punk anthem, which is actually something that Offspring did as well, and I think it's worth noting that, because obviously Brett was working with Offspring, but they started to find this formula where during these fast-paced albums they'd have something that was a much slower, much hookier and bigger, and on Against the Grain it was 21st Century Digital Boy, which yes, they went and re-recorded it, but it was a big change of direction for them.
I'm a 21st century digital boy. I don't know how to live, but I got a lot of toys. My daddy's a lazy middle class intellectual. My mommy's on Valium, so ineffectual.
There's other great tunes in that. It's still quite a fast album. Modern Man and Anesthesia, which I think is just one of their best tunes, full stop.
Everybody's gonna go to wedding, kill the delivery bound. But you look so kind and gentle, it just doesn't stand a reason.
But Against the Grain's a little bit longer, it's 35 minutes. It had apparently no promo on radio or TV at all, but still managed 100,000 sales, which was kind of a testament to the credibility and the sort of word of mouth that the band was enjoying at the time. It was also the first time as well that Bentley wrote a song by himself, and I think there's a Bentley Hetson collaboration on that. So that was the first break from the formula of like Graf and Gurewitz.
Have you
Any thoughts on that one?
It's all right. My favourite thing about it is Robert Christgau's, the self-proclaimed dean of American rock critics.
I love
his
that guy.
3-word review: "Life still sucks." 1 star.
Is that a shit sandwich? Is that what that is?
More or
pretty
less.
much.
I bet he was very proud of himself. Good day's work there.
One of the things that this album really highlights is this is when the harmonies start to come in properly. This
Yeah,
is the
true.
record for that. 21st Century Digital Boy is a great example of that. But like you said, Chris, it's got Modern Man.
A modern man, evolutionary betrayer. Modern man, ecosystem destroyer. Modern man, destroys all the chain. Modern man, pathetic example of his organic.
Anesthesia. I like Flat Earth Society. I think it's pretty good. Entropy's pretty
That's
cool
it.
too.
That is a good song, actually. You're right. I think Anesthesia, the harmonies are what make that. The way they trail off the last line of every chorus, I think that's just fucking tremendous. And that was a big, what's the word? It really distinguished them from their peers.
Yeah, so think about the band at this point now. They've been going for about 10 years, and in the past 3 they've just written 3 albums which have completely invented and changed punk and invented two whole new genres, you could say. That's fucking incredible, man.
So straight off the back of that, with that sort of tweak in their songwriting style in mind, they went into Generator in 1992. Now, I believe that Brett Gurewitz had moved into a new studio. I don't know too many of the details, but they fancied recording this there. And I think, is this the one that the album was recorded almost completely live, which I think was a bit of a departure for them. It doesn't sound great.
Like a rock, like a planet, like a fucking atom bomb. I'll remain unperturbed by the joy and the madness that I encounter everywhere I turn. I've seen it all along.
And you know what? It's a real shame, because just as you were considering Suffer, Mark, I was considering this as their Unsung album. I think this is a really fucking good record. I just think it sounds crap.
I agree.
And that's really frustrating. It was the first album they did with the drummer Bobby Shire, who went on to do loads and loads of stuff for them. It was the first time they ever did a music video for the song Atomic Garden.
It's in a playpen, but nobody wants to play in my garden. I see the hippies on an angry line. Guess they don't get my meaning. I'm enchanted by the birds and my blossoms. I'm enamored by young lovers on the weekend.
They took a lot of chances with the songwriting in this album. They really went in some interesting directions. You've got Generator, which is essential to their live sets now. You've got Heaven Has Fallen, but you've also got stuff like Atomic Garden, which is unusual. You've got The Answer, which was like their big sort of rock moment for this album.
The heavens changed in predictable ways, and one man was able to find that he thought he found the answer, and he was quick to write his revelation. But as they was
Which I think didn't land anywhere near as well as 21st Century Digital Boy or the likes of American Jesus and stuff that came after it, but I think it was trying to be that. And they've also just got great songs like Fertile Crescent.
my optimism was running high. The new world order was on my mind, but I couldn't believe it when I heard them say they're throwing it away. And the fertile crescent is burning today, and baby, my emotions are too.
Which I think's really up there with some of the faster, earlier stuff like You. But yeah, the sound quality drags this whole album down, because otherwise I think it's a very underrated collection of songs. It's something that works really well live.
There was also no preparation or rehearsal before they hit the studio for this as well. So they were basically just playing the song until they learned it, then hit the record button, which is not the way that I'd do it, put it that way.
So do you think that comes across in the sound where there's maybe like a lack of emotion or enthusiasm or whatever, if it's just they're not as attached to the songs, if it's been a quick turnaround like that?
See, when I've done this. We had a first album where we'd written and gigged the songs for years, and then we had a second album where a lot of the songs in it had never been played live, and songs do sound different when they've not been sort of road tested.
Totally.
There's aspects of them that you realise don't work in a live environment, and they get tweaked as a result, even if it's just a sort of pitching of the vocal, even if it's when a guitar comes in, even if it's a tonal thing. What makes sense in the studio and in your head doesn't always translate particularly well once you take it out in the field, and this album sounds, like Mark says, sounds unroad tested. Like the sounds and the arrangements might have evolved slightly had they been forced to play them in front of people and really realise what needed an extra push, what wasn't working, what was over long. It does actually sound a bit like a studio project in that sense, and it is weird, the subtle, almost imperceptible but very, very important changes that you make just in that slow, gradual process of road testing music.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, this album is a lot more intricate, like melody-wise and kind of, the way it's structured. And they've got a new drummer at this point who they said who had like a lot more range of ability than Pete did, and Pete was pretty good. So I think it's really interesting that not being able to work out those kinks, like Chris says, and from my experience as well, like if you kind of really want to be playing those songs live, or at least putting them in the same room together for a long period of time, which didn't really seem to be the case with this record. And I think it's good and bad in some ways. I don't think a song like Atomic Garden would have been the way it was if they'd played it live a lot. So I think there's like pros and cons to it, but that and the actual recording, the actual sound of it really knocks it down when it really shouldn't be, considered to be a lesser Bad Religion record on the face of things. Yeah,
songwriting wise, I think it's a really strong album, but I would have loved to have heard it better produced and gigged first. I think that could have really helped it kind of fulfill its potential. I do think it's underrated though. I really did. The artwork's dire. They apparently had a lot of disagreements about the artwork for this record, and it's so dull and grim.
Yeah.
And
it looks really sort of like post-grungy. It could be like, or it could even be like a Pixies album cover or something, but like without anything memorable. But it definitely doesn't look like a punk record.
Yeah, it's
just
very
remind me what year it was that the album
1992.
It was recorded in 91 and then it came out a year later.
Yeah, post
so
Nirvana.
that kind of makes sense then, doesn't it?
Yeah. Talking about that era as well, obviously you had a huge feeding frenzy with alternative bands. The Bad Religion made a controversial transition from Epitaph to Atlantic, and they made it just after releasing the next album, Recipe for Hate, in 1993.
The spread of culture, the sword of progress, the vector of suffrage, a warm and septic breeze, the pomp and elation, the duty and vocation.
It originally came out in Epitaph and then was re-released in Atlantic. I'm not sure actually. I'd imagine there's probably a fair amount of like collector's value in the Epitaph original issues of this.
Yeah.
But The cover on this is actually great. It's a mixture of, what is it? The dogs' faces were taken from a picture in Auschwitz, and the guys' bodies that are in the cover were taken from 2 white supremacists that were like acquitted in court and came down the steps laughing outside the courtroom or something like that after a lynching or something. It's a really loaded cover. It was done by a guy called Fred Hidalgo, who also did the cover art for Smash by Offspring, another great record of this era. It's a bit mixed, this album. It's like trying to write rock, but I don't necessarily think that the songs totally land. They've got punk tracks like Kerosene, they've got Skyscraper and stuff. They've got an absolute belter in this song, which basically props up the album, in the track American Jesus, which is one of their all-time classic tunes. Like, huge song for this band. Showed they had like the ability to write an anthem, and I think probably really cemented their deal with Atlantic. It's a brilliant song. It really is a brilliant song.
We've got the American Jesus, fostering national faith. We've got the American Jesus, overwhelming millions every day.
But the album overall, whilst it has prominence in their back catalogue, I've never really understood why. I don't think it's a particularly playable album.
I think you're probably right there. I think it's good in places, and the songs you've highlighted are probably the ones that I would talk about as well. To be honest, Struck a Nerve is pretty cool.
And she spent her last dollar on a bottle of vodka for tonight. And I guess it struck a nerve, like I had to scrape my eye.
I don't know if you mentioned that, but yeah, there is that. I think like Eddie Vedder does the backing vocals on American Jesus, which is mental. The thing that I liked about it the most is that you start to see them experimenting with alternative rock, which would play a greater part in subsequent records. I think you'd like to think that maybe Atlantic or labels were approaching them at some point, and that's maybe why they started to think like this. I mean, Greg and Brett have both said individually in separate interviews that they weren't actually thinking about it to make it more accessible. That's not what they were planning on doing. It just seemed to come out that way. But they tried to approach it in a different way in order to kind of shut up their critics, apparently. So maybe that's why that happened.
I mean, if we're going to get serious, so what they did, in my opinion, is absolutely eclipse this album with the next album, Stranger Than Fiction, which came out in 1984. It was fully on Atlantic. There's 2 versions of this, by the way. There's a version which I think's about, 38 minutes or something like that, and then there's one that's a bit longer. And see the extra tracks on the bonus version, they are some of the best tracks the band ever did, and it's mind-blowing that they were only there as bonus tunes. I originally got them on a bootleg, and I didn't even know that they were meant to be on this. So yeah, this is their full major label debut, sort of. The context of it as well is that it came out the same year as like Dookie, Offspring were huge, No Effects were happening, Weezer by Weezer was coming out. There was a move towards kind of emo and punk and kind of alternative. I don't know, like I know Weezer and No Effects are very different, but they do sort of have a crossover appeal, and Bad Religion were, I think, trying to appeal to that. Andy Wallace was involved in the production, who'd worked on Nevermind to, well, great effect if you want to sell 30 million albums, not great effect if you're Kurt Cobain and you don't want your tracks to sound overproduced, but I'm sure he got over it when he looked at his bank balance. There's 4 singles in this. For me, I think this is the best album overall. Just going to say it. This wasn't by any means the first Bad Religion album I got into, but it's got at least 2 different Bad Religion triumvirates in it, where they just hit in a run of 3 songs that are just incredible. It's got a lot of variety in the delivery and the style of the songs. The quality of the recording and the production is just superb. I think some of the best tracks in this are actually not even the singles. Handshake is one of their best tunes of all time.
Every time you shake someone's hand, and it feels like your best friend. Could it be that
Tiny Voices, Better Off Dead, Hooray for Me, Fuck You, and as I said, a couple of the bonus tunes, including News from the Front and Leaders and Followers, which was actually the first Bad Religion song I ever heard because it was on the soundtrack to Clerks.
right peripheral maintains total advantage, fighting hard to absent every guess? Do you know your place in the big charade? Are you more than
Clerks.
Clerks.
Yeah. I think that's the tune that's on when they're running away from the funeral in the film. And I'd first heard it on Bruce Dickinson's Radio 1 rock show when I was taping that, and I absolutely love that tune. This also has a whole bunch of cameos on it. I mean, Mark mentioned Eddie Vedder on the previous album. This has Wayne Kramer, the MC5, on the opening track, Incomplete, playing guitar, and that actually works pretty well. What doesn't work well is Tim Armstrong, that cock appearing on television to do vocals.
candidates are running and the son of God is coming. Quacko metal convolutions, tuned in the revolution. Now everyone's included, so it never gotta be
I always hated that, even before I hated Tim Armstrong. It just doesn't work for me at all. It's also got the guy for Jim Lindberg of Pennywise. Pennywise, Anna.
Oh, Pennywise, of course. So that
On the
makes
track.
sense.
Yeah, on the track Marked. The sense of the bigger songs in this is often attributed to them having a major label deal, but I really don't see that. I mean, I do genuinely think that across the three previous albums, with American Jesus on Recipe, with The Answer, which I don't think was great, but on tried to be on Generator, with 21st Century Digital Boy, on Against the Grain, they were clearly showing that we're trying to do bigger songs. And Mark mentioned Gurewitz's sort of ambition to do these poppier songs.
And you've also got Andy Wallace now in doing the mix and the production.
Yeah.
So like you've
And I
got a
think
huge bit of polish right there.
Exactly. So even if you weren't doing a polished song, Andy Wallace can polish a turd. I mean, I don't think any of these were turds, but he could make something sound really fucking good. And there were criticisms at the time that they'd signed to a major and overcompensated by avoiding writing anthems. And the reason that they ended up re-recording 21st Century Digital Boy for this album is because Atlantic were unhappy at the lack of potential singles on the record.
oh yeah. 'Cause I'm a 21st century digital boy. I don't know how to live, but I got a lot of toys. My daddy's a lazy.
They felt that the band had gone too punk with the album, and they insisted that they do something, and the band just said, well, how about we redo this banger,
This one single that we once wrote.
yeah,
Well, that's,
that we didn't
funnily
really
enough,
do
is
justice.
when Mark mentioned a while back that they've stayed the same size basically throughout their career, I kind of feel that it's because they have been very steady in terms of releasing solid albums, and then maybe their later ones get less solid, but their legend increases. But they've never really had big hit singles, and so they've just never gone out there and like got a mainstream audience. It's just like preaching to the converted.
There's always like a 120 minutes vibe with them. You would hear American Jesus or 21st Century Digital Boy or something like that, but it was always on the kind of off the beaten track rock shows.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I think a lot of their singles over the years have then been on the likes of that P-Rock channel that we used to have when we were younger, and I think there's a band that's so iconic that because they have spanned such a long period of time, that young people have then grown into adulthood enjoying them. The next generation of young people does the same thing, and they span over those different generations. And I think when you're a Bad Religion fan, you're then consistently a Bad Religion fan for your whole life. Whereas there's other punk bands that folk maybe get into as teenagers and then fall away from it over the years. But I think probably, like you say, their consistency and their consistent style is what maintains their audience in a way that other people's fandom fades.
And also because they maybe don't aim at like teenage heartbreak songs or know whatever. They're enough for a 17-year-old reading their first Chomsky book to get onto, but then you can still be listening and reading that when you're 50. So
Yeah, I think they never got big enough to risk jeopardising their own credibility either. I think if they were ever going to break with that, it was when they signed to Atlantic. It was controversial, it was somewhat hypocritical. It's a bit like the Rage Against the Machine thing. This is a band that really has quite a large amount of political content in their lyrics, and I think even in this album you can hear them wrestling with their consciences and their critics. They're tracking it called Handshake, and the theme of Handshake is like every time you shake someone's hand, it determines where you stand. It's got a line in it, contracts determine the best friendships. But then later on in the album there's a track called Hooray for Me, Fuck You, where he says the line, I like the things I do, so hooray for me and fuck you, and sort of glorifies in the fact that he feels he's still doing it in his own terms and he gets paid to make punk rock music and it's sort of a bit nihilistic. And it really feels like there's a slight inconsistency over the course of the album in terms of how they're handling the accusations of selling out. Musically, they don't sell out. As I said, some people even thought they overcompensated. But it was an interesting spell for them, and if they were ever going to blow it, I think this was the point where they were going to blow it. But as Dave says, it didn't get big enough to risk blowing it. They were never going to do American Idiot or a fucking musical. Aye. It just wasn't on the cards. And the highbrow nature of their lyrics didn't lend itself well to American Pie.
I think, one
I love
thing...
how you say highbrow nature of the lyrics just after talking about a song called Hooray for Me and Fuck You.
But Anna, it's very knowing.
Okay,
it's very,
okay. They've got self-awareness.
Exactly.
I think it's an interesting point you mentioned those two songs, Chris, because the Handshake's written by Greg and Hooray for Me, Fuck You is written by Brett, who both have completely different approaches. Who are going to have both completely different approaches as to what the major label identity is going to be bringing them. Brett's been working for fucking years and he doesn't need to be in a major label at this point. To be fair, in hindsight, he was probably like, fuck, I've just really smashed. We probably didn't need to sign to Atlantic.
Yeah.
But he also says that he thinks Infected should have been the first single, and I happen to agree. In the middle of punk, in the middle of grunge, or at the end of grunge, Infected is a guaranteed radio hit, no question about it. I think they could have sold even more records if that was the first, because that is more of a downbeat kind of Nirvana-esque sounding single, because it's so dark and it's one of the longest songs as well. It's like 4.5 minutes long, which is weird.
See, I actually was kind of oblivious as to how big a tune for them Infected had been. Mm-hmm. I like it. I like it. I think this is their best album, but I didn't really click on that as being the outstanding tune on the record by any means. I think there's any number of better songs in this, and I also think that clearly 21st Century Digital Boy was, as I see it, the obvious grunge cash-in. That slow, lumping, simple, kind of Bush-esque, kind of post-grunge chord progression thing. That just seemed more obvious to me as a way to exploit that zeitgeist. But I mean, I think Infected is a great song. I hadn't realised it's a huge favourite at their shows. I didn't know that either, despite having seen them. It clearly doesn't stand out that much. I mean, okay, so the album after this, Grey Race, we're going to talk about in the next episode at length, I'm sure. They followed that with No Substance, which is where things start to go a little bit off the rails, because as this title suggests, this is an album really lacking in substance. There doesn't seem to have been any particularly strong batch of songs that necessitated it being made. Biggest Killer in American History is okay. It was on a Kerrang CD years ago, and I remember it was kind of much awaited to see where they went. It was sort of underwhelming.
Yeah.
I would say this is debatably their weakest album overall. Taking Into the Unknown out of the equation, perhaps, but it's a real fucking misfire.
Did they just have to put it out? Was that a label obligation?
Partly that.
They were on. Yeah, I mean, they were on a contract for a certain amount of albums.
Yeah.
It's incredible when you consider this came off the back of the Grey Race, which I'm going to obviously argue is fucking chock-a-block with total rippers, and that they couldn't even muster one for this record. That's wild. I just can't get my head around that.
So how long after the previous album was it?
Only 2 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And then 2 years after this, still in Atlantic, they brought out the New America, which is another flop of an album. It has an okay tune here and there.
Have you lost your sense of sustainability? We are just a step away from realizing what we strive to be, but we got to break out.
I think the whole album was by Greg Graffin for the first time, though. I think Brett Gurewitz did he was out again at this point, and he did like a guest contribution on Believe It.
It's like a guitar solo, basically.
Yeah, it's the last album featuring the drummer Bobby Scher as well, who by this point was kind of struggling. It's a pretty weak album, and I think even if their contract hadn't been up, they'd probably been dropped off the back of it. It was really, really disappointing.
You talk about No Substance having like no actual theme to it and no substance. Do you think that like that's a reflection of 90s America?
No.
No.
I think that's an interesting point, man, because
I actually have context for that.
Okay, well, can I just say, having not considered it, based on what Dave's just said, they were clearly going to argue have a huge return to form with their next album, Process of Belief, in 2002, which is post 9/11, and suddenly there's a hugely reinvigorated political appetite in the States. I kind of see where Dave was coming from with that, man. Late 90s was a very complicated, murky, sedate, Lewinsky-ish morass of politics. It wasn't the band really seemed to thrive in the more contentious environments.
Yeah, well, I mean, from Greg's point of view, when he was talking about it, he said that the whole concept of No Substance, and it's reflected in the artwork, is that it's all about how TV and media is taking over people's brains, which is a totally bullshit thing to say at any point anyway, because whatever. But
fucking been getting said for years as well. It's not exactly new. I mean,
but the way they're
like, just to be clear, like the film They Live came out fucking 13 years prior to that.
Yeah, Videodrome was like 20 years old.
Yeah.
But the actual creation of the record was vastly different. So they went in to create an album which they felt harkened back to the 80s, that they felt was going to be very spontaneous. It was a whole band in the room writing together, which is something they'd never really done before anyway.
For good reason.
Yeah. And there's some hilarious things that were said around about the time. It's like, I wanted to bring it together like we did in the old days and have everybody get in the studio and arrange the songs together as a group. That's what Greg said. He also said like it's one of the freshest records we've ever done. All is complete bullshit, right?
PR bollocks. Yeah.
And the reason that I know it's complete bullshit, because Jay went on to say, it's like, Brian and I did all those interviews with No Substance in New America when we just kind of painted on a smile and said, this is great, this is the greatest record we've ever done. And then I said, this is fucked. I'm just going to be honest from now on. I'm tired of pretending. I already had second thoughts when we were making these records. When we made No Substance, we had no material, we had no songs. We just walked in the studio and goes, let's write some songs. It's fine, it's not terrible, but I'm putting no context in it with Bad Religion whatsoever. Like,
totally shows.
Completely
totally shows.
On autopilot. But I think they had good intentions though. They wanted to do something a bit different. And New America, the New America, it gets even worse with the New America, by the way. Holy shit, man. Jay Bentley fucking hates that record because they recorded with Todd Rundgren, right? And he basically just recorded everything DI'd apart from the drums. And he was like, he was saying, the reason I found this out is because I watched the Premier Guitar rig rundown, and he was saying, we did New America and I went to Hawaii and just played golf for like 3 weeks. And it was before they had no mobile phones, so nobody knew where I was. And we went to Todd Rundgren, and we all fucking love Todd Rundgren. We think he's great, and he heard all the demos. We went out to Hawaii to make it, and he's like, don't bring any amps. And they were like, what? It's like, well, he's saying there is no studios with a sufficient size or any soundproofing out there anyway, and the loudest thing in the band's the drummer. So we just went to a place where we wouldn't get any complaints about doing the drums, and then we just DI'd everything else, and that's why it sounds fucking shit as well.
Punk as fuck.
Yeah.
I mean, that's horribly 2000 as well. It really is. Mm-hmm. I mean, thankfully things changed in a fucking big way when they brought out Process of Belief in 2002, which we'll talk about. New drummer comes in, Brett Gurewitz comes back, we'll get to that. 2004 though is another really overlooked point, because the band, I mean, certainly with No Substance in the New America, I'd stopped following them. They weren't a band that I really I mean, as much as I liked Process of Belief, I still thought maybe it was just a fluke. Empire Strikes First is a really good record.
Unrehearsed. Here we go again to stage the greatest show on heaven and earth. Come on, get your money worth. Don't wanna live.
It's their 13th album. It definitely wasn't unlucky. They had a lot of political commentary in it. There are loads of Iraq themes. The invasion of Iraq had happened the year before. There's some hilarious patter where they try and say that they try to avoid partisanship in their lyrics because they don't want to. They don't want to contribute to the sort of widening gulf in American political conversation. But I think that's laughable when you consider the themes and the artwork and the subjects in Bad Religion albums. I mean,
You can't be called that and not have a freaking stance on it.
You know what, actually? So it's interesting that you mentioned that, Anna, right? Let's talk about the Crossbuster very quickly, right? Because the Crossbuster is their logo, which is a crucifix with a cancelled sign through it. I fucking had a t-shirt of that. I loved that shit. I loved rocking about town, upsetting old ladies in that t-shirt. I was talking to my flatmate Luigi. He grew up in Italy. He did the exact same thing. He bought a Bad Religion Crossbuster t-shirt, and over there it had even more clout because it's Italy, you know. And just something so cathartic about being 15 years old and rocking that shirt, and your parents being a wee bit uncomfortable with it. And listening to the band talking about that is really, really entertaining because they're like, they kind of dismiss it now. They're like, we were 15 and we just thought, like, apparently Brett had like scribbled it on some paper and they're like, oh, that's cool, man, that'll piss people off, let's do it, let's make that our logo. It's also kind of telling of like their kind of Western centricism in that they were so convinced that their crucifix in that t-shirt stood for basically an avatar of all religion.
Yeah.
They were like,
That's a
like,
good
no,
point.
guys. And ironically, the funny thing is, it's one of the safest logos. You know, it just is. It's one of the safest logos, and certainly in certain parts of the world, like Europe, to put a big strike through. You know, it has a very different connotation rocking about in a Bad Religion Crossbuster t-shirt than it would if you had, say, an Islamic symbol or a Jewish symbol, for example. And that's quite interesting in itself, because even though they claim to be sort of not fans of religion, whilst not being anti-religious, they chose to target that symbol. And as they've said, they were like, we were kids, it isn't an avatar for all religions, but it's probably just as well in hindsight that that's the one that we went for.
Totally. It would have been interesting if every album they had a different religious symbol crossed out on it.
Interesting's a polite way of putting it. Plus, I think Screwdriver already had the Stan David one sorted.
Yeah.
But Empire Strikes First is a really, really good album. It's got some of the best tunes of the later years, like Los Angeles is Burning, which is a tremendous tune. It's up there with some of their best.
When the hills of Los Angeles are burning, palm trees are candles in the murder wind. So many lives are on the breeze.
Social Suicide is another absolute belter.
It's got the triumvirate, the triumvirate, mate. It's got Sinister Rouge, Social Suicide, 80s Peace.
right now, when it's finally time to face my fears, gonna get the hell out of here and create a fresher atmosphere.
Those three
Absolutely.
bangers back to back.
I love it as well. Sinister Rouge has this little thing that we'll talk about later in the next episode, the little Irishness that kicks through in some of their tracks, the little bit of Real Mackenzies.
It's all Greg. All Greg.
No, but I know, Anna, I'm with you generally speaking, right? But in the right measure, it's fucking brilliant. And they do.
No. Any of that stuff, Real Mackenzie's, Dropkick Murphys, it's just so... It's so phony sounding. That's what
Anna,
it is to me.
Yeah.
Anna, why you hate yourself so much? Why are you so ashamed of your culture?
Because I'm from the west of Scotland. Isn't everybody negative here? No, in all seriousness though, I just feel like those types of sounds coming from American bands, it just sounds really forced.
At the risk of tartan-splaining here, I think it works pretty well in the context of Bad Religion, though I agree it doesn't with the band you mentioned. By the way, this album has a production credit, programming by Atticus Ross. How fucking hip is that?
That's
Great.
pretty cool. It also has what's his face, Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers playing guitar on Los Angeles is Burning.
Fucking hate Tom Petty.
Yeah, same. And Chris Wheeler from Hot Water Music has got writing credits on 2 of the songs, which is cool.
Well, it's a strong album, and I didn't expect them to do it.
I was going to say that, and when you actually, unless you've subscribed to our Patreon, you've probably still not heard this episode. What was it, the last one we put out? Best songs on Shitty Records. I picked Los Angeles is Burning, and then when I went back and listened to this, I completely I retract that entirely.
It's not that shit.
Yeah, it's not that shitty record.
They did follow it with another couple of dips though. New Maps of Hell in 2007. Back in Epitaph, I don't massively rate it. New Dark Ages is an okay song.
Yeah.
So avoid those lines of sight, and we'll set this right. Welcome to the new dark ages. Yeah, I hope you're
They followed that with The Descent of Man in 2010. They had a single off that, Devil in Stitches, which I really don't get why it was a single. I think it's a particularly good song.
I think it's a great song.
So don't look homeward, angel from that rumble seat. I can strum twice and make it all go away. We'll tap every last drop until that beating stops, and let the devil come join us dancing.
Really?
Yeah, there's just something about it that I really like. Only Rain's a good song on that too, but for the most part it's kind of meandering.
Album doesn't really do a lot for me. They did follow that with True North, which is their kind of penultimate album to date, which I think is really good. It's a kind of much more punky return. It goes back to some of the kind of the earlier stuff, and it's, I think just in its arrangement, it's much more simplified.
It was deliberate as well.
Sorry?
It was deliberate on their part as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really well reviewed. BBC gave it 9 out of 10. Loudwire gave it 4.5 out of 5.
Oh yeah, this is a tale of Robin Hood in reverse. Citizens united, I was excited. The kids are united, they can never be divided. But that was yesterday.
And then their most recent album to date, and we'll bring this episode to a close on it, is Age of Unreason, which is sort of riffing on the Donald Trump thing. We all thought Bush was bad. That's the thing, right? Save your bad religion and you shoot your bolt on George Bush thinking he's the worst human being that you could possibly imagine and the worst person that could come around, and then they go, like, America goes and sees you and raises you.
I think a lot of bands did that, like bands like
Yeah.
Ministry, and there was the whole Rock Against Bush movement, and then everybody now is
I
just
know.
like, oh fuck, what are we supposed to do?
We should totally have a thing to describe the sort of Trump impotence, which is like where you've like shot your bolt on Bush and you just can't get it back up in time to do any valid criticism.
See all those bands that spoke out against Bush back then, like the Not My President t-shirts and all the rest of it, you know, they
Fat Mike.
were politically, I guess, active at that time through their music, trying to convey their thoughts to their fans. But see, my perception is that actually just now bands aren't making music about Trump or raising awareness about Trump, because I think they are just absolutely fatigued with it all by this stage.
Yeah, it's
You know,
too
the
obvious.
same- Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like they don't need to
totally.
make any statements.
Yeah.
You know, the thing is, so Donald Trump did something that, like, I think genuinely almost nobody else has ever done, which is to actually invite and challenge the criticism in ways that he's literally shameless. Like,
Yeah.
you can't shame the shameless.
Aye,
you
that's true.
could shame George Bush. There was still a facade of competence that he was trying to maintain, as you know, as much as the guy was an idiot and as much as he's definitely responsible for the loss of a lot of human life, maybe even more so than, in fact, probably more so than Donald Trump. The damage to the infrastructure of countries, to sanity. I mean, and Donald Trump's catching up with them when you factor in COVID, not just in America, but his impact on Brazil, Russia, the disinformation around things like that. Like, he is shameless. You
Yeah.
can't even write songs to, like, he's killed satire,
Aye.
you know.
That's why South
this-
Park stopped writing episodes about current affairs, because they were like that. The world is just so ridiculous at the moment that you can't even make an episode funny about what's going on, because it's so surreal as it is. And
absolutely.
it, you know, it's such a bizarre time that we're living
Yeah.
in.
When you have 11 politicians that speak out for QAnon, then it's very, very hard to outflank that in terms of satire. But I mean, fittingly, at least with Age of Unreason, they absolutely nailed it with this brilliant song called "Don't Lose Your Head," which I did not expect to pop up on that record. It's not even particularly punk. It's a bit sort of like a kind of alt rock.
Lose your head. Don't lose your head. Don't lose your head. Don't lose your head. Before you lose your head, yeah.
It's got even a hint of like REM to it, albeit it's a lot fuller. But I mean, just in terms of sheer unabashed, joyous, melodic sort of indulgence, it's very, very good. It's a really
big
nice tune.
REM fan.
We are going to get there, Anna, and you are not going to be invited to that party. I am, when it comes to REM, I shall not be shamed, and I will literally just
I'm
pull
not
the
trying
plug
to shame you.
You know what? I'm going to pull the plug in this episode right now because I don't like where this conversation's going. I'll meet you guys in a week when you're fucking cooled off, right? I think that's enough for their back catalogue. We've got 2 albums to get through and then Next Eye, so we'll just nip it there. But that's the history of Bad Religion as we see it. You may well disagree, but hooray for me, fuck you.
Yeah.